I never thought the person who knew my routines best would be the one quietly watching them. When your own child starts asking questions that don't feel like concern anymore, you notice it in your gut before you can explain it out loud. I stayed calm. I kept going to work. If you've ever realized too late that trust inside a family can be used as leverage, share your experience in the comments. Ethan brought it up while I was putting tools back on the shelf. "Dad, you should check your brakes," he said. "You've been driving a lot lately. Long stretches." The way he said it made me pause, though nothing in his tone sounded dramatic. He stood near the car, hands in his jacket pockets, watching me instead of the vehicle. That alone felt off. Most people look at what they're talking about. "What made you think of that?" I kept my voice even the way I always did when something didn't quite add up. He shrugged. "I just worry. That's all. You're not exactly young anymore." It was said lightly, but the words landed heavier than intended. The comment wasn't new. The timing was. I leaned toward the front wheel and knelt more out of habit than suspicion. The brake assembly didn't look wrong at first glance. No leaks, no obvious damage. Still, something didn't line up. 2 bolts showed different wear patterns. One had a fresh scrape bright against older metal. The other looked untouched. That kind of mismatch doesn't happen on its own. "Did you touch this?" The question came out flat without accusation. "No," Ethan answered too quickly. "Why would I?" He laughed once short and sharp, then shifted his weight. "You're probably just seeing things. Cars get old." The laugh didn't match the moment. Neither did the way he turned his head toward the driveway, already steering the conversation somewhere else. "You want dinner?" he asked. "Linda's probably waiting." I stood up, wiped my hands on a rag, and didn't push further. Years of parenting had trained me to pick my battles. This didn't feel like one I could win with a raised voice or a pointed finger. The space between us stretched not in words, but in timing. His answers came half a second too soon. My questions came a second too late. We weren't talking to each other anymore. We were moving around something neither of us named. I closed the hood and grabbed my keys. "Going out?" he asked. "Just a drive." He nodded, relief flickering across his face before disappearing. "Be careful." The shop sat at the edge of town, the kind of place people went when they wanted a straight answer instead of a sales pitch. Marcus Hill waved me in from the bay door, wiping his hands on a towel that had seen better years. "Brakes right?" He glanced at the car, then at my face. "Something bothering you?" "Just want them checked," I said. "Thoroughly." He nodded and got to work without another question. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. No small talk, unless it mattered. The car went up on the lift. Marcus moved with a steady rhythm, loosening parts, setting them aside in an order that made sense to him. A few minutes passed before he stopped. "These were pulled," he said, "then put back." "How can you tell?" He pointed without dramatics. "Threadwear doesn't match. Whoever did it didn't follow the sequence. Not a mistake a shop would make." I leaned closer, not touching anything. The confirmation landed heavier than the suspicion had the day before. Marcus raised the lift another foot. While checking the undercarriage, he froze and reached toward the frame rail. "Hold on." Something small dangled near the rear axle, tucked where most people wouldn't look. He unfastened it carefully and let it rest in his palm. "That doesn't belong here." "What is it, Tracker?" he said. "Consumer grade, GPS with a cellular chip." The word hung there, not dramatic, just factual. "It's not law enforcement," he added. "No markings, no serial tied to an agency." I didn't respond right away. The question formed on its own, without urgency, without heat. "Who benefits if something happens to you?" Marcus asked it plainly, as if discussing weather or mileage. The towel stayed in his hands. His eyes stayed on mine. No answer came. Not because there wasn't one, but because saying it felt like crossing a line I'd spent years protecting. He set the device on the workbench. "Someone wanted to know where you go," he said. "Maybe when. Maybe how long you stay." A memory slid into place. Ethan asking what route I took to Billings. Another time wanting to know when I usually got back from Helena. Casual questions, framed as concern. Marcus kept talking, filling the gap I hadn't. These things update every few seconds. You can track from a phone. Not expensive, easy to hide. My thoughts drifted to money conversations I hadn't wanted to have. Ethan offering to handle a few bills when things were tight, suggesting joint access for convenience, pushing gently then a little harder when I said no. Could be nothing, Marcus said. Could be someone nervous, or something else, I replied. He studied my face, then nodded once. "I won't remove it unless you ask," he said. "Right now it's information." The word mattered. Information meant options. Doubt crept in uninvited. Fathers are supposed to trust their sons. That belief doesn't fade easily. It presses back, insisting you're overthinking that the simplest explanation is the right one. "What if I'm reading this wrong?" I asked. Marcus shrugged. "Then watching won't hurt. Pulling it too soon might." He slid the tracker back into place, careful to leave it exactly where it had been. "You drive like normal," he said. "See who reacts when the signal moves, or stops, and the brakes." "Safe to drive?" he replied. For now, the phrase carried weight without emphasis. Payment was quick. No receipt with details. Just a nod and a look that said he'd be around if I needed him. On the way out, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Everything okay? Haven't heard back." I didn't answer. The turn toward home came up and I passed it. Instead of heading back, the car rolled west toward a neighborhood I hadn't visited in years. Tom lived there now, an old colleague from before my transfer, someone who still answered calls without asking questions first. He opened the door in work boots and a faded jacket. "Everything all right? Need a favor," I said. "Can I borrow your car for a few hours?" He studied my face, then nodded. "Take it. Just bring it back with gas." No explanation was required. That kind of trust used to feel normal. It felt rare now. I parked my own car in a public lot near the highway, far enough from town to blend in, close enough to pick up later. The tracker stayed where Marcus had found it. Nothing was touched. Nothing was corrected. Tom's sedan drove differently. Lighter. Less familiar. That was the point. The interstate stretched ahead, a route Ethan had asked about more than once. Billings, Helena. Places he liked to keep tabs on, supposedly out of concern. I merged into traffic and settled into a steady pace, not rushing, not lingering. Minutes passed. Then the phone vibrated. "Are you heading out of town?" The message came from Ethan. No greeting, no context, just location. I didn't answer. The next exit came and went. The road kept pulling forward the same way it always had. Part of me wanted to turn back, pull into a rest area, peel the tracker off, and end it there. Let this dissolve into an overreaction. Fathers do that. They talk themselves down. Another part stayed alert. That part remembered the mismatched bolts, the too fast denial. The phone buzzed again. "Just checking. Haven't heard from you." Still no reply. 10 miles later, the call came. Not Ethan. An unfamiliar number. "Hello." A pause. Then a man's voice, cautious. I might have the wrong number. Are you the owner of a dark pickup parked near exit 298? "Yes, it's been sitting there a while. My boss thought it might be abandoned." "Is there a problem?" "No, just figured I'd call before reporting it." "Thanks," I said. "I'll take care of it." The line went dead. The realization arrived without drama. Someone else was watching the signal. Someone who didn't have my number saved, who only had what the tracker gave them. That narrowed things down and widened them at the same time. Ethan wasn't the only variable. The urge to confront him rose fast, then settled. Confrontation would end the flow of information. Silence kept it moving. Traffic thinned as the afternoon wore on. I stayed on routes Ethan knew, then took one he'd never mentioned. The phone stayed still. No message, no call. That mattered. At a fuel stop, I pulled in and sat for a moment without getting out. The car idled. The world kept moving around it. This was the point where a different version of me would have backed out. Driven home, asked questions over dinner. That version had trusted the wrong things for too long. I turned the engine off. Another message appeared, delayed by a few minutes. "You okay? Car hasn't moved." It was phrased casually, but it wasn't casual. He was watching motion, not checking in. I typed, erased, typed again, then put the phone down without sending anything. The drive back toward town felt slower, not because of speed, but because every mile carried weight. Patterns were being drawn without my consent. Someone was waiting for confirmation I wasn't ready to give. At a rest stop, the borrowed car rolled into a space and stopped. I stayed seated, hands on the wheel, listening to the engine tick down. The phone stayed silent. That silence told me more than any message could. Whatever plan existed depended on movement. Stillness interrupted it. After a few minutes, the key turned. The car came back to life. Town waited ahead, unchanged on the surface. Tom's driveway appeared sooner than expected. I parked, shut the door, and stood there longer than necessary before knocking. "Everything good?" he asked when he opened it. "All good," I said. "Thanks." He didn't push. The walk back to my own car felt measured. Each step carried the awareness that something had shifted, not outwardly, but in how I moved through familiar ground. The pickup sat where I'd left it. Nothing obvious, nothing reassuring either. The phone rang just as the town limits came into view. "This is Officer Reynolds with the Bozeman Police Department. Am I speaking with Daniel Brooks?" "Yes. We need to confirm your location, sir. Are you currently driving your pickup?" "No," I said. "I'm in Bozeman." "I'm fine." There was a brief pause, keys clicking in the background. "We've got a serious accident reported on Route 12, he continued. "Vehicle matches your license plate. Witnesses say the driver left the scene. That wasn't me." "I understand. We need you to come down to the station so we can clear this up." The call ended without urgency, just procedure. Still, the words stayed with me. Same plate, different road. That meant the signal had traveled somewhere I hadn't. The truck rolled forward again, following directions I'd driven for years. Nothing looked different. That made it worse. Halfway to the station, my phone lit up again. Ethan's name filled the screen. I answered. "Dad." His voice came fast, unsteady. "Where are you? On my way to town." "Are you—" He stopped himself. "Are you okay?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer this time. I heard something he said. About an accident. "Your truck." "I'm aware." His breathing changed. Not relief. Calculation. "What kind of damage?" He rushed the question. "Do you know if insurance covers it?" "That depends," I said. Why silence again? Then words that didn't belong where they landed. I mean, if something happened, the paperwork matters, the policy, the title. You always said everything was organized. My grip tightened on the wheel. The road stayed straight. The moment bent. "You think I was in that crash?" I said. "I didn't say that. You're asking the question someone asks when they think it already happened." His breath caught. The sound was real. So was the mistake. I just needed to know, he said, if things went bad. Bad how he didn't answer right away. If you were gone, Ethan said, I'd need to know what to do. That was it. No anger, no accusation, just clarity. I'll call you later, I said, and ended the call before he could recover. The rest of the drive passed without thought. Doubt didn't have room anymore. Whatever benefit of the doubt I'd been stretching finally tore. At the station, an officer met me at the door and led me through routine questions. Name, address, confirmation I hadn't been on Route 12. A report waited on the desk. The vehicle involved took off after impact, he said. Wrong plate, same model. Happens more than you'd think. Did anyone get hurt? Minor injuries? He replied. No fatalities. That mattered more than it should have. Another officer stepped in with a phone and a photo of the tracker already removed from the wrecked vehicle. Ever seen one of these? Yes, I said. It's mine. Or it was attached to my truck. That changed the tone. Paperwork multiplied, questions sharpened. Who knew about it? Who had access to the vehicle? Who benefited from tracking my movements? Answers came easier now that I'd stopped protecting the wrong person. Ethan's name stayed unspoken, but present. It didn't need to be said yet. A statement was typed up. Dates, times, locations. I described the garage, the mismatched bolts, the shop visit, the borrowed car, the messages. Can you show us the texts? One of them asked. I handed over the phone. The room filled with the soft sound of keys. No one rushed. No one reacted. That was worse than judgment. When the questions slowed, a door opened and closed somewhere down the hall. Shift change, maybe. Life continuing. Mr. Brooks, the officer said, sliding the paperwork forward. We'll need to follow up on a few things, I figured. You're not in any trouble. I know. He nodded, not unkindly. I stood, thanked them, and stepped out into the evening traffic. The phone buzzed again before I reached the truck. Another message from Ethan, unsent, replies stacked behind it. Please call me. The interview room hadn't changed, but the questions had. A different investigator sat across from me, now older, slower with his words. A thin folder rested on the table between us. He flipped it open and pointed to a photo clipped inside. The vehicle with your plate was struck from the side, he said. Not enough to disable it. Enough to cause panic. Who was driving? We don't know yet. The driver left before officers arrived. He slid another page forward. The tracker you described was recovered at the scene. Same model, same adhesive pattern. That confirmed what I already suspected. Someone had taken my truck where I wasn't supposed to be at a time I wasn't expected to survive. My phone was returned when the formal questions paused. The screen lit up with missed calls and messages stacked one on top of another. Ethan's name filled most of them. The first messages had been frantic. Dad, please call me. Are you hurt? Then the tone shifted. Do you know what happens with the insurance if the car's totaled? Where do you keep the title again? Reading them in order felt like watching a mask slide off. The investigator noticed where my eyes lingered. Family, he asked. Yes. He nodded, not asking for more. He'd seen enough versions of this to know when silence carried information. While he stepped out to make a call, memories pressed forward without invitation. After the divorce, Ethan had shown up with a duffel bag and no plan. A failed business deal. Credit cards maxed out. Promises about short-term help. I hadn't asked for details. Didn't want to pry. Didn't want to judge. The spare room stayed occupied longer than expected. Conversations about budgeting turned into suggestions about access. Joint accounts were framed as efficiency. My refusal was met with patience, then irritation disguised as concern. Back then, keeping the peace felt like responsibility. Now it looked more like surrender. The investigator returned and closed the folder. "This may turn into a staged accident case," he said. "We're coordinating with traffic and fraud." A nod was all I offered. Words wouldn't change the direction anymore. Another call came through as I stood to leave. This time it wasn't Ethan. "Daniel," the voice said, clipped and familiar. "It's Karen. You need to come by tomorrow." Karen had been my attorney for years. Wills, property, boring things people assume will never matter urgently. "What's going on?" I asked. "There are documents I haven't seen before," she replied. "And I think someone else has." That landed harder than anything said in the room. "What kind of documents? Draft authorizations," she said. "Contingency paperwork. Prepared but not filed." The implication didn't need explanation. Someone had been planning for my absence with more certainty than concern. Traffic moved slowly outside the station. I stayed seated in the truck after starting at phone, resting on the console. Ethan called again. I let it ring. Karen texted an address and a time. Tomorrow morning. Early. The space around me felt smaller than before. Not claustrophobic, pressurized. Family on one side, law enforcement on the other. The middle ground I'd lived in for years had collapsed. Ethan left a voicemail. I didn't listen. Hearing his voice would only reopen questions already answered. Instead, I drove home and packed a small bag. Papers, a change of clothes, nothing dramatic, just enough to avoid another unplanned conversation. While zipping the bag, the phone buzzed once more. "You can't shut me out," the message read. "We need to talk about what happens next." The assumption sat bare in that sentence. Not if something happened. When? Karen was already waiting when I arrived. A legal pad sat open on the table, pages marked with small tabs that hadn't been there before. "Have a seat," she said. "We need to go through this carefully." Files moved across the desk. Deeds, account summaries, the kind of paperwork that usually put people to sleep. Today, every page felt sharp. "These are the documents you signed 2 years ago," she said, tapping one stack. "And these are not." She slid another folder forward. Inside were copies of an authorization form and a draft will. My name appeared in places it shouldn't have. The signature looked close enough to pass a glance, but not close enough to survive scrutiny. "I didn't do this," I said. "I know," Karen replied. "The timing doesn't line up, and neither does the ink." That was the first moment hope surfaced. Not relief, not victory. Just the knowledge that the trail hadn't been erased. Before either of us could say more, the door opened. Ethan stepped in like he belonged there. "I was worried," he said. "You didn't answer your phone." Karen's eyes lifted slowly. "This is a private meeting," she said. "I'm family," he replied. "I have a right to be here." "No," she said. "You don't." He turned to me instead. "Dad, this is getting blown out of proportion," Ethan said. "People are asking questions. Police, lawyers. We should handle this together." "We are handling it," I said. "Just not with you present." His jaw tightened. The tone shifted. "What happens if something happens to you?" he asked. "Have you even thought about that?" Karen leaned back, pen still. "That's not an appropriate question," she said. "It is," Ethan shot back. "I'm his son. You're also not a client," she replied. He ignored her. "You don't know how hard this has been," he said, voice rising. Waiting. Not knowing. "If that accident had been real?" "When did you find out about the accident?" I asked. The question landed cleanly. No edge, no volume. He paused. "Yesterday," he said. "Someone called me." "Who? I don't remember," Ethan said quickly. "It was chaos." Karen glanced at me. You told the police you heard about it the night before, she said, and that you were already looking for insurance information. Silence stretched thin. I was preparing, he said. Someone had to. Preparing for what I asked. For responsibility, he said. You've always avoided these conversations. That wasn't true. They'd just never gone the way he wanted. Karen stood. I'm asking you to leave, she said. Now. Ethan laughed once, sharp and brittle. You're making a mistake, he said to me. They're turning you against your own blood. Karen pressed a button on her desk phone. Officer Reynolds, she said calmly. Yes. We need you here. Ethan's face changed. Not anger. Calculation again. You called the police, he asked. They were already involved, she said. You escalated this. The officers arrived within minutes. Questions followed, not accusations, clarifications, dates, who prepared what, when access had been granted. Ethan talked too much, corrected himself, explained things that hadn't been asked. Each word narrowed the space around him. One officer held up the draft will. You said you didn't see this until yesterday, he said. But you referenced this clause 2 weeks ago in a message. Ethan stopped speaking. Karen gathered the folders and closed them. This meeting is over, she said. Ethan looked at me then. Really looked. You're letting them do this, he said. You're choosing paperwork over your own son. I'm choosing facts, I replied. The officers escorted him out. He resisted at first, then slumped anger draining into something closer to panic. The door closed behind them. Karen exhaled slowly. This isn't finished, she said. But it's started. I nodded, though certainty hadn't arrived. Only direction. Days blurred into one another without losing their shape. Meetings filled the hours. Statements were reviewed, corrected, reviewed again. Karen handled most of the talking. The police handled the rest. My role stayed simple answer. When asked, provide what was requested, then step back. Evidence stacked up on its own. The tracker's purchase trail led to a prepaid card, then to a store less than 10 miles from my house. Surveillance footage showed Ethan at the counter hood, up paying in cash. The timestamp matched a weekend he'd told me he was out of town. Text messages were laid out in sequence. Not the ones meant for me, but the ones sent to numbers I didn't recognize. Screenshots showed location pings, questions about movement, notes about delays. One voicemail stood out. Left minutes after the accident report aired on local radio. If this went bad, Ethan's voice said, "Rushed and low, call me first. We need to handle this clean." Hearing it played back in a neutral room stripped away any remaining confusion. That wasn't panic. It was planning. Somewhere along the way, the weight shifted, not outward, but within. The habit of self-blame loosened its grip. Parenting comes with a long list of imagined failures. This no longer belonged on it. Responsibility had lines. Those lines had been crossed. The final interview happened mid-week. A different room, same building. Ethan sat across the table, shoulders rounded, eyes red. No defiance left, just exhaustion and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said, voice breaking. I was trying to protect myself. The detective didn't react. From being left with nothing, Ethan replied. From starting over again. Karen placed a hand lightly on the table, a reminder to stay out of it. I did. He kept talking anyway. You don't know how hard it's been, Ethan said, turning toward me. Everyone expects you to fix things. You always did. That used to work. It didn't anymore. I need a break, he added quickly. I wasn't thinking straight. The detective nodded once, making a note. Forgery and unlawful tracking don't require intent, he said. They require action. Tears came then. Loud, uneven. Blame followed close behind. The economy, bad timing, pressure, anything that wasn't choice. I answered when addressed. Dates, confirmation. Nothing more. The interview ended without drama. Ethan was escorted out a different door. Paperwork resumed. Charges were outlined. Next steps explained. No one promised outcomes. They never do. At Karen's office later that afternoon, the new documents waited neatly arranged. A revised will, a trust adjustment, clear language, fewer assumptions. "You don't have to rush this," she said. "I'm not rushing," I replied. "I'm finishing." The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not from doubt, from finality. Signatures went where they belonged. Initials followed. Each mark reduced the space for interpretation. Karen gathered the pages and set them aside. "This protects you," she said, "and it limits future access. That's the point." The building emptied as the day wound down. Karen slid the final packet across the desk and waited while I read the first page again. The language was plain. No room for interpretation. When I signed, it was with the same pen I'd used all week, the ink steady. "That completes it," she said. "We'll file this today." I nodded and stood. No relief followed, just a settling, the kind that comes when a door closes without slamming. Outside, the phone rang once and stopped. I didn't check it. News had a way of finding people on its own. The consequences moved forward without ceremony. The trust amendment took effect. Ethan's name was removed from the line of inheritance. Accounts he'd leaned on froze, then closed. The investigation widened as paperwork was compared and timestamps lined up. Forgery carried its own gravity. Unlawful tracking added another layer. There was no meeting to explain it to him. No private conversation to soften the edges. Lawyers spoke to lawyers. Officers did their work. Family members learned through calls they hadn't expected to make. Some reached out to me. Most didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," one cousin offered. "For everything." "That's kind," I said, and left it there. Work resumed the following Monday. Schedules, deliveries, problems that could be solved with attention instead of caution. The team asked how I was doing. I told them the truth. "I'm fine. Let's get through the week." Meetings filled the hours again. The familiar cadence returned. I'd missed it more than I realized. Competence has a way of steadying the mind. On Friday afternoon, Marcus called. "Truck's ready whenever you want it," he said. "Thanks," I replied. "I'll pick it up tomorrow. The brakes were replaced properly. The tracker was gone." Nothing hidden remained. Weekends changed shape after that. Not dramatically. Intentionally. I started walking trails near home places I'd driven past for years without stopping. Joined a local search and rescue volunteer group that needed steady hands more than strong opinions. Training sessions filled Saturday mornings. Maps, radios, procedures that rewarded patience. Nobody asked about my family. They didn't need to. News arrived in pieces. A court date set. A request for documents. A reminder not to discuss details publicly. I complied. Silence this time wasn't avoidance. It was boundary. One afternoon, a message came through from an unfamiliar number. "I need to talk," it read. I didn't respond. The urge to explain rose and passed. Explanations invite debate. Decisions don't. Karen called later to confirm filings. "This will stand," she said, "barring something extraordinary." "Good," I replied. She hesitated. "Are you all right?" Yes. And it was true. Not because nothing hurt, but because the hurt no longer dictated my actions. The mountain rescue group trained that evening. A simulated call-out, timed response, clear roles. When the exercise ended, we shared coffee from thermoses and packed up without ceremony. Someone joked about bad weather next week. Another checked a map twice. Driving home, the road felt ordinary again. That mattered. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rear-view mirror. Older than I remembered. More settled than before. The habit of scanning for what might go wrong had eased, not gone, just no longer in charge. There was no victory lap, no sense of triumph. What existed instead was space. Enough to think clearly, enough to choose carefully. The house stayed quiet when I returned. I put the kettle on sorted mail, set out clothes for the morning. Routine anchored the evening. Before bed, the phone buzzed once more. A voicemail notification. I didn't play it. The message could wait. Or it could remain unheard. Either way, the boundaries held. Morning came on schedule. Work waited. The trail map rested by the door. I locked up and stepped out, keys in hand, moving into the day with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Not because everything was fixed. Because I was.